Welcome back. Our guest today is Fahmida Kamali. When she first started working in the Ontario Public Service, she noticed that she is one of the few Muslims on her team. This sparked her interest in starting a network of Muslims who work for the public sector. She named it PS I'm Muslim. Fahmida, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell me, what does PS I'm Muslim stand for?
So when I wanted to create this network of Muslims in the public service, as a public servant, my inclination was try to create an acronym.
Yeah.
So I came up with one, PS I am. But as I started thinking more about the name, I made it into PS I'm Muslim, because not all of us wear our Muslimness on our sleeve. Being Muslim is only one part of our identity. So I just wanted it to, imagine if you're writing a letter to somebody and at the end of it you'd write, PS I'm Muslim.
So I find that very helpful, and I too work in the public service. So I know when I started, I sort of tried to reach out to sort of a Muslim community, and I wasn't very successful. So what were some of your experiences in terms of actually creating this network? Because I know you said you noticed that you were the only visible, or one of the few visible Muslims, right? Yeah. So how did that transition to when you first came into government and sort of your experiences with the Muslim community?
Yeah, so I've been in government for about almost 4 years now. And in my first team, I noticed that there were other Muslims in the building, but there weren't any that were on my team that could relate to me about my experience around fasting and other cultural aspects of being a Muslim. And then last year, when I was on a team where I was the only Muslim person, my Muslimness didn't really become an issue at all. I got along really, really well with the team.
Can I just pause you for a second? When you say Muslimness, what do you mean by that?
Just the fact that I wear hijab and have different experiences from all the other white people on my team.
Okay. Keep going, sorry.
Yeah. So there was a shooting last January, at the end of last January, and it happened on a Sunday night. And I use Twitter a lot, so I was tweeting about how I was feeling, all this information as it was coming out. And then when I went into work the next day, my colleagues were talking about everything that was happening in the news. It was around the time of Trump's Muslim ban. It was the time that everybody was saying boycott Uber. But the only news item that they weren't talking about was the Quebec mosque shooting. And then when I talked to some of the people on the team, they said that the reason that they didn't want to talk about it was because it was too political. And that's what really rubbed me the wrong way. The fact that 6 Muslims were murdered for practicing their faith, which is a constitutional human and Canadian right, to be murdered over that, and that being too political to talk about at work, especially with members on your team who would be impacted by it, that seemed unfair to me.
What did you, when you were talking to them, when they say it's political, like from their perspective, what's political about it?
It's political because it's an uncomfortable discussion, something that people haven't had to talk about. I really love my team. I got along really, really well with them. So much so that they didn't see me as being any different from them. But they didn't understand my experiences of what it's like to be a Muslim, what it's like to wear hijab, what it's like to be on the subway when somebody harasses you. And then when I did bring up these issues, they became afraid, because sometimes when you're trying to explain to something or to somebody about what's not right, unfortunately they take it on themselves as them being the perpetrators of the thing that you're telling them about. So it's around uncomfortable discussions and kind of never having to have those discussions before. That's when I realized that I needed to talk to other Muslim people, others who had had my experience, so that we could relate to each other and share some tactics of how do you navigate being a Muslim in the public service.
Did you find prior to that, when you first came into the OPS, did you, so you felt like there was no, like you didn't know how to reach out to those people, or what was sort of, what was the hindrance in terms of creating that or connecting with that community? And I can tell you, for me, I reached out to a few people and they said, okay, meet with these Muslims, and to be honest, it wasn't very helpful. So I was kind of like, okay, I'm just going to move on to other mentors. But what was your experience like?
Yeah, so I'm a presenting Muslim woman. So I wear hijab.
What do you mean by that?
So I wear hijab, and when you look at me, you know that I am Muslim if you know what hijab means and if you know what Muslims wear. But for a lot of people, they aren't presenting Muslims, and that's okay. Like, everybody has their own choices. So when I was looking around, the only way for me to identify if somebody was Muslim was if they were wearing hijab, and there's not that many people that choose to wear hijab. So that's okay. It was just when I looked around, I couldn't find anyone who was calling themselves a Muslim. And
you mean like visibly, in that sense, that you could go and relate to? Yeah,
it's not that people are talking about what it's like to wake up for Ramadan, because that happens once a year, and if it's not that time of year, people aren't talking about it. You don't talk about these things around the water cooler about what it's like to be a Muslim, because there's not many people that can relate to you.
Yeah.
But that results in other Muslims not being able to find you. So there is no community, right? Like that's why I wanted to create one.
And what about sort of, there is this gap in terms of connecting and being able to relate to these things, but what about in your day-to-day work experiences? Do you find, and you can share as much detail or as little detail as you want, but in terms of, people talk about experiencing microaggressions in the workplace and that kind of thing. How do you find, like, have you or do you experience that, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I work on a really, really great team right now. So I started a new job a few months ago, but it's been my experience experiencing microaggressions for a long time. And it'll be the little things, right? Like somebody sees a woman wearing hijab, they expect me to be demure, quiet, not ambitious.
Not happening.
And then when I am excellent, they're like, wow, like I really didn't expect that from you, or I'm so surprised that that's what you want to do with your life.
So tell me a little bit now about PS I'm Muslim. So we talked a little bit about the name, but what is it more than, what more do you envision for it?
Yeah, so I don't want it to be any sort of stuffy professional development, like networking type of group. That's not the type of person that I am and not the type of vibe that I'm trying to create. I just want us to make friendship, as I said at the first event. I want us to meet other Muslims who are working in the greater public sector. So it's not just for folks who work in the Ontario Public Service, but if you work in the greater public sector. So any levels of government, if you work in politics, in healthcare, and education, you can be part of this group.
Like at municipal and federal level?
At any level. And I just want it to be a community where you're meeting other people who share some parts of your experience, where you can talk to them about, hey, there's this thing happening. How do I address it? How do I learn from people that came before us, people who identify as Muslim, maybe people in leadership positions, and then also talking to your peers about, how are you thinking about developing while you're working in the public service? What sort of things do you want to do while you're in public service? And really just to meet other people. Like, that's what I want it to be. Our first event happened on April 19th, and it was a resounding success. It was over 100 people in the room.
It's amazing.
And we had two non-presenting, so not hijab-wearing women come in and talk about
who are Muslim.
Yeah, they're both Muslim. One woman was an Ismaili Muslim, and another person was, I believe, a Sunni Muslim, but she's of Pakistani descent. And they just both talked about their experiences working for one woman working in the public service, and for the other working in politics, and what it's like when your Muslim identity comes up and how that feels. And people were so grateful for that conversation. It was really easy. There was a lot of learning that happened, and it was a room full of Muslims. There was only one white person there. That was my manager. But it was a great conversation, and I think people really felt that there was a safe space to have these discussions.
I know I came to the event and I thought it was phenomenal, and I was actually talking to a friend of mine, and after we were reflecting on how we all experience these challenges within the workplace, but now you finally have a space where you can breathe and be like, okay, you're going through it, I'm going through it, okay, like it's sort of, unfortunately or fortunately, normalizes it in some way. So is that sort of what you're looking to do with sort of these networks and these spaces?
So, as a Muslim person, I'm asking organizations to be more inclusive of our experience, but I also know that within our Muslim community, there's a lot of work that we have to do around inclusion. There's a lot of stories that we erase in the Muslim community. So when you imagine what a Muslim looks like, you tend to think of a Desi or an Arab person, but for a lot of us, we tend to erase the Black Muslim experience. As part of these conversations where I'm asking public sector organizations to be to be inclusive of Muslims, I will also want to help the Muslim community become more inclusive itself.
So the focus of the conversations is not necessarily, these are the experiences within the workplace, but rather it's sort of also sort of bringing out some of the challenges within the Muslim community. But what are you hoping to do with that? Because some people might say, okay, Fahmida, it's great that you're doing this, but you know what, why are you airing our dirty laundry, which I've heard people say about some of the stuff that I do as well, but how would you respond to that? Why air it in sort of such a broad, in such a space, right? Because PS I'm Muslim, I think it's gotten a lot of traction for excellent reasons. So how would you respond to that specifically to the Muslim community?
So this community that I've created, it is for Muslims, and for us to air our dirty laundry amongst us is something that we should be doing. So I think it's an important part. If we really want to move forward, these are the conversations that we need to be having. And they're difficult conversations, but they need to happen. Because as we learn and unlearn amongst ourselves, we can also help people that don't share our experience, non-Muslims, also learn and unlearn how to be good allies, how to be good supporters, how to really do inclusion well.
Where do you see, just as we wrap up, where do you see this network going, I don't know, like 10 to 20 years from now? What are you hoping it'll accomplish for, I know it's a very loaded and big question, but what do you hope it'll accomplish for specifically the public servants, in different levels of government?
In 10 to 20 years, I honestly haven't thought about that yet. I don't want it to turn into anything other than being community first. So really understanding the needs of the community. We did a co-creation activity at the last event where we asked all the attendees what it is that you want the group to be doing. And I hope that the work that we do will reflect the needs of the community, and then also as new needs come up, we can address those. But really it's to help people, anyone who identifies as a Muslim and also happens to work in the public service for now, because a lot of people have reached out to me and they've said, I want the PSI Muslim brand for other sectors.
Yeah.
And I want to enable that, right? I want people to feel comfortable about their Muslimness, doing whatever it is that they do. And so I think that's the end game. For all of us to be comfortable with our identities and to be really thriving in whatever work that we're doing.
And just one final question. What were some of the key areas that people identified as part of the co-creation activity?
So a lot of people did identify opportunities for leadership training and mentorship and development. So I do want to create a space where people who have been in public service for a longer time are able to share their experience for folks who are newer. A lot of people have said, issues around workplace inclusion. So the need for how do you talk to an organization about creating prayer space. So that is maybe some of the conversations that we'd be helping people have. So things like that really, but also at the end of it, people really just want to meet each other and get to know one another and really just make friendship.
Well, I'm really happy to meet you in this capacity as well. So thank you so much, Fahmida, for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
If you want more of Let the Quran Speak, you can watch previous episodes or new ones by subscribing to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/QuranSpeaks. Stay updated by liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter @Quran_speaks. And when you're on the go, listen to our podcast at QuranSpeaks.com.